Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today, we're doing a deep dive into something you interact with every single day, but probably never noticed. We're looking at American identity, culture, and politics, but we're doing it entirely through the lens of faith. Basically, we're going to explore how a secular society curates and fiercely protects what it means to be American by functioning as a literal religion. We'll be looking heavily at how concepts of God and atheism fit into this national faith, and it is honestly going to change how you see the news forever. So let's just jump right in. Picture this. It's the 4th of July, right?
Oh yeah, classic.
You're standing in a crowded park, you've got the smell of barbecue everywhere, and suddenly the opening notes of the Star-Spangled Banner ring out over a loudspeaker.
Right, and everything just stops.
Exactly. Conversations stop, hats come off, hands are placed over hearts. Or, consider the quiet reverence you might feel looking up at Mount Rushmore. Or even something as simple as pulling a dollar bill out of your wallet and reading, "In God We Trust" on the back.
Yeah, we usually just file all of those things under patriotism.
Right. But if we look closer at the sheer intensity of these moments, a totally different picture emerges. Like, what if these aren't just patriotic expressions? What if, as a citizen, you are actually participating in highly curated, deeply sacred rituals?
And that shift in perspective is crucial for our discussion today. Because when a citizen labels an action or a symbol as American, they're doing something far more profound than just stating a legal fact.
Oh, real quick, before we get too deep into that, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. Okay, sorry, go on. You were saying they're doing more than stating a legal fact.
Right, yeah. They're drawing a boundary around a concept that they treat as sacred. The idea of the nation itself becomes the absolute center of a value system. It generates, a level of devotion that completely mirrors traditional religious fervor.
Which totally explains the visceral reactions we see in public life. Like, if someone critiques the Constitution or disrespects the flag, the crowd around them doesn't just politely disagree on policy.
No, not at all. It's visceral.
It's almost physical. People react as if a profound blasphemy has been committed, like someone just spat on a holy relic. But let's unpack this for a second. When our sources use the phrase American civil religion, are they saying America is a literal religion with a capital R? Or is this just a really potent metaphor?
Well, to answer that, we have to deconstruct the phrase itself, starting with the word civil. So the sociologist Robert Bellah brought this concept into the mainstream back in 1967 with his essay, Civil Religion in America.
Okay.
And Bellah clarified that civil here means of the state. So it's the overarching religion of the we, when Americans say we the people. It represents fundamental beliefs and rituals that the state holds in common with all its citizens.
Functioning totally outside of any specific church, right?
Exactly. Completely outside of any denomination.
But wait, the word civil usually implies secularism, right? Like civil courts, civil rights. A core tenet of the U.S. is the constitutional separation of church and state. So it feels like a massive oxymoron to claim that a secular state has a religion.
It does sound contradictory, yeah. Until you separate public faith from private theology. And this is where the dynamic between religion and atheism becomes really fascinating in the sources.
Right, because how does an atheist fit into a civil religion?
Well, Bellah argued that this civil religion exists irrespective of anyone's personal private theology. So a devout Christian, a practicing Buddhist, and a staunch atheist can all completely coexist within this framework.
Because the ultimate focus isn't on a supernatural afterlife.
Exactly. The focus is the sacred nature of the national project itself.
Okay, so the shared faith isn't directed upward at a specific deity, it's directed inward at the idea of the nation.
Yeah, perfectly put.
That actually explains a phenomenon I think we all experience. Like, you can be standing in a stadium during a military flyover and you feel this profound, swelling sense of shared reverence.
The goosebumps.
The goosebumps. And the atheist and the theist standing shoulder to shoulder are getting the exact same goosebumps in that moment because the object of worship is the shared American ideal.
Right. The awe is generated by the collective weight of the society. But to really analyze how this operates without getting bogged down in actual theology, our sources shift how we understand the word religion.
Okay, how so?
So the scholar Jonathan Z. Smith pointed out that religion isn't this magical, objective thing that just exists out in the wild. It is an analytical tool created by scholars.
Meaning we use it to compare and map cultures.
Exactly. So our goal here isn't to put American civil religion on a chart next to, like, Islam or Hinduism to see who has more followers. We are using the category of religion as an X-ray machine.
Oh, I like that. An X-ray machine to see the skeleton of American culture.
Yeah, to understand the mechanisms that turn abstract political ideas into concrete behaviors. And to operate that X-ray machine, we use the framework of the 20th century anthropologist Clifford Geertz.
Right, Geertz. He's famous for defining religion not by gods or spirits, but as a cultural system dependent on symbols.
Yes, he has this massive, five-part definition.
It's a monster of a definition. He argues that a religion is a system of symbols that establishes powerful moods and motivations, while creating a general order of existence that feels so factual, the moods seem uniquely realistic.
That's one.
But let's pause there, because while Geertz's definition is respected, it is incredibly broad. Hear me out. If a religion is just a system of symbols that establishes moods and organizes reality, couldn't a massive commercial entity qualify?
Like a corporation.
Yeah. Think about Coca-Cola. It has a globally recognized system of symbols. The red and white colors, the contour glass bottle. It actively establishes powerful moods of happiness and nostalgia through its advertising rituals.
It even has its own mythology with Santa Claus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So under Geertz's broad umbrella, is Coca-Cola a religion?
Scholars have actually raised that exact critique. When your definition relies entirely on symbols and moods, you risk catching corporate branding or intense sports fandom in your net.
Yeah.
But the academic consensus is that while Geertz's definition might be imperfect for isolated things, using it as a stress test for something as complex as American national identity is incredibly revealing.
It bridges the gap between high-minded democratic theory and everyday emotions.
Exactly.
Well, I want to see this stress test in action. Let's apply his 5 criteria to America, starting with the foundation, a system of symbols. I mean, this is the easiest hurdle to clear, right?
Absolutely.
The visual use of the American flag is ubiquitous in a way that is highly unusual compared to other modern democracies. It's on front porches, it's printed on fast food packaging, pinned to politicians' lapels.
Draped over coffins?
Yeah, draped over coffins. And it's not just visual. There is a deeply symbolic vocabulary embedded in American rhetoric. Words like liberty, frontier, the Founding Fathers, they carry a mythological weight way beyond their dictionary definitions.
They do. And Geertz's framework asks what those symbols actually do. His argument is that they establish powerful, pervasive motivations in the people.
Which we see clearly when those symbols are contested.
Yes. Consider the intense polarization in politics today. Why are citizens so motivated? Why does the rhetoric get so angry? Because factions are literally fighting for control over the meaning of sacred symbols.
Think about the last time you saw a news segment about an athlete refusing to stand for the national anthem. Notice how uncomfortable or even outraged it makes certain people.
It's not a measured disagreement over tax policy?
No, it's a visceral reaction to a sacred ritual being broken. It's the exact same psychological response a devout congregation would have if someone interrupted a church service. The stakes feel impossibly high because they are debating the soul of the civil religion.
And when those ideological battles over symbols reach a boiling point, the civil religion has a mechanism to resolve them. Look at the Supreme Court.
Oh, this is fascinating.
Right. We all know the visual imagery, the marble columns, the absolute silence required, the black robes, the elevated bench. But viewed through this lens, those 9 justices function as a high priest of the nation.
They are the designated arbiters entrusted to interpret the sacred text, the Constitution. So if the justices are high priests, then their written opinions are essentially theological exegesis. They are legally settling disputes over what the symbols mean.
Yeah, you see this perfectly in a case like Texas v. Johnson in 1989.
The flag-burning case.
Right. The court had to decide if burning the American flag was protected speech. By ruling that it was, the high priests essentially declared that the sacredness of the flag comes from what it represents, freedom, rather than the physical cloth itself.
That is a massive theological ruling for the civil religion.
It really is. Now, moving further into Geertz's framework, he says these symbols must formulate a conception of a general order of existence.
Meaning the religion has to provide a framework that explains the universe and the nation's place in it.
Yes. And to see how American civil religion does this, we have to look closely at the nation's motto, "In God We Trust."
Okay, this is where the intersection of theology, secularism, and atheism gets incredibly complex. When the state prints "In God We Trust" on its currency or inserts "under God" into the Pledge of Allegiance, it's explicitly appealing to a grander design.
It's framing the United States not as a random historical accident, but as part of a purposeful universe.
Right, but how does a secular democracy mandate that kind of order without completely alienating millions of secular or atheist citizens?
Well, the answer lies in the specific nature of the God being invoked.
Yeah.
In the context of civil religion, the God in God we trust is deliberately stripped of specific Orthodox theology.
Because if it were explicitly the God of the New Testament, it would violate the separation of church and state.
Exactly. It would alienate non-believers immediately. Instead, this functions as what legal scholars call ceremonial deism.
Ceremonial deism, so it's a placeholder for ultimate moral authority.
Precisely. It's a unifying mechanism. An atheist citizen might interpret God in this context not as a supernatural creator, but as a symbolic nod to the profound historical weight of the American project.
Like the spirit of history or the trajectory of justice.
Yes. Meanwhile, atheists can seamlessly blend their personal religious faith with their patriotism, viewing the nation as divinely blessed.
So the profound genius of the civil religion is its broad accommodation. By keeping the symbol of ultimate order vague, it uses God to unify rather than divide.
It creates a baseline reality that everyone can operate within. And that brings us to the fourth function. Geertz argues a religion must clothe its conceptions of order in an aura of factuality.
It has to feel like it has always been true, like gravity.
Yes. And there is no clearer articulation of this than the most famous line of the Declaration of Independence.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
Exactly. They didn't write, "We have debated these ideas and concluded they are politically advantageous."
Right, they declared them self-evident, meaning these truths are fundamental facts of the universe, no proof required.
And a successful civil religion hardwires that aura of factuality into its citizens from the very beginning, through consistent, repetitive practice.
Which perfectly explains the Pledge of Allegiance in schools. It's a daily liturgy. You have millions of kids, 5 days a week, standing up, facing the primary symbol, and reciting a creed.
When you participate in a physical ritual like that, every morning during your formative years, it hardwires that baseline reality.
By the time you're an adult, American exceptionalism doesn't feel like a political theory. It feels inherently factual.
Their internal radar becomes incredibly strong. You develop an intuitive sense of what aligns with the civil religion. But, and this is crucial, that strong boundary also creates the capacity for exclusion.
Because when an ideology feels like a self-evident fact, anyone who opposes it isn't just incorrect, they are a threat to the natural order.
Which brings us to the immense danger of the term un-American.
Yes. In normal discourse, if you disagree with a policy, you call it misguided. But when a politician labels a movement or a person as un-American, they are deploying a totally different weapon.
If American identity is a religion, calling someone un-American is the civil equivalent of excommunicating a heretic.
It's terrifying how effectively that works. You are declaring that the target does not belong to the sacred community.
You're using the overwhelming power of the civil religion to enforce orthodoxy. It signals to the faithful that this person must be cast out to preserve the purity of the nation.
It strips away their legitimacy entirely. Wow. Okay, rounding out Geertz's framework, we get to the final test. Do the moods and motivations produced by these symbols seem uniquely realistic?
Do they feel authentic and transcendent, larger than any individual?
This has to be the hardest hurdle for a secular state. Can a system designed by humans actually generate a feeling of transcendence?
Our sources point to a phrase used by almost every modern president at the end of a major address to answer this: "God bless America."
Okay, so we have to analyze what that phrase is actually doing. Does the invocation of God there reflect a sincere theological shift?
Or is it designed to generate a deeply real, unifying mood that validates the secular state?
Going back to the atheism dynamic, the power of God Bless America doesn't rely on the listener literally believing in divine intervention. The power is the mood it instantly generates.
Solemnity, historical continuity, shared destiny.
Yeah. When a leader says those words after a tragedy, it elevates the state's actions to a transcendent mission. The feeling of being part of this sacred project feels uniquely realistic to the listener, whether they believe in a literal God or not.
And that is the ultimate triumph of a civil religion. It proves a modern secular society can produce deeply religious psychological experiences. The reverence, the willingness to sacrifice for ideals, these are incredibly real emotional states.
Even if the object of devotion is a set of democratic principles rather than a supernatural being. So bringing all these abstract frameworks back down to earth, What does this mean for you, the listener, as you navigate your week?
Well, recognizing this underlying system fundamentally changes how you interpret the rhythm of American life. It literally reframes the calendar on your wall.
Think about why the whole country shuts down for specific long weekends, like Memorial Day or the 4th of July.
They aren't just arbitrary breaks. They function as the high holy days of the civil calendar.
Memorial Day is a ritual to honor the martyrs who shed blood for the civil religion. And Thanksgiving is the national origin myth of Providence.
It also clarifies our expectations for decorum. It explains the outrage when monuments of national heroes like Washington or Lincoln are vandalized.
Because those statues aren't just historical markers, they are shrines to the saints of the civil religion. Vandalizing them is an act of iconoclasm.
American civil religion is, at its core, the sacred myth that the society continually tells about itself to maintain cohesion.
And cohesion requires maintenance. The most profound takeaway here is that the fundamental sacred act of this civil religion is the sheer audacity of staking a claim to be America.
Right. The power of the nation doesn't descend from the sky. It is generated entirely from the ground up. By participating in the rituals and arguing over the symbols, citizens actively renew that power.
The religion only survives as long as the congregation continues to believe in the symbols and show up for the rituals. Which brings me to a final thought for you to chew on long after this deep dive ends. We've spent our time today exploring American identity as a functioning religion. But history tells us that all religions eventually face massive, fracturing internal challenges.
Every single one.
Think about the fierce existential polarization we see in the news every day. People aren't just arguing over policy anymore. They are fundamentally questioning the sacred texts, tearing down the shrines, and challenging the authority of the high priests. So what happens to the nation when its followers experience a widespread cultural crisis of faith?
What does an American Reformation look like?
Exactly. And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, are we living through one right now?